Now, I would like to invite all the panelists to the podium. Then we can start discussion, inshallah. We have a question for Imam Abdul-Malik. I would like to ask Imam Abdul-Malik to share with us his thoughts about how we can use Islamic spirituality when going through difficulties of the life. You already touched upon in your presentation an important notion of Islamic spirituality, Marifatullah, knowledge of God, or knowledge about God. This is not an intellectual knowledge, rather a spiritual knowledge. We can call it as consciousness of God in a sense, I think. This is really an important notion. But it is kind of very high level in Islamic spirituality. I mean, to attain Marifatullah is an advanced level for the wayfarers in Islamic spirituality. So, Imam Abdul-Malik, what do you recommend ordinary people like me to do in terms of benefiting from Islamic spirituality?
Ordinary people like us. I believe in the fact that Islamic spirituality is not something that is bifurcated from our practice or our beliefs. I do not believe in a Cartesian dualist separation between the body and the soul. They are all intertwined. And I think that if we are to be more aware of our emotions and how we feel, as well as what are the motivating factors behind those, and we are able to tap into our spiritual practices, whether it's prayer or dhikr, remembrance of God, or its supplication, and do that in a way where we are addressing our emotional challenges through understanding God's omnipotence, through understanding God's power, understanding that God does not give us, la yukallifu Allahu nafsan illa wus'aha. Allah doesn't burden us with more than we can bear. And then through this process, every single thing which we're going through in life, regardless of how difficult or challenging it may be, is a means for us to then find a meaning and connection in whatever we're doing or whatever we're experiencing. Secondly, reading the stories of the sages and scholars or people who've experienced things in the past, whether it's our prophets, Ayub and Yusuf and Yunus and their examples, or it is people from our lifetimes, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, all of these other people, to derive from their experiences a means of inspiration and motivation to persevere throughout whatever we're going through. And Allah knows best. May Allah make it easy for us all.
Thank you very much. We have a question for Sister Samira Ibrahim. Sister, in your presentation, you shared the lessons you extracted from the Qur'an. Thank you for this. I like this kind of lessons, but more than that, I am interested in the process of getting the messages or lessons from the Qur'an and the Sunnah. What should be the criteria? For example, yesterday, Dr. Nur Akhras was telling us that she used some verses of the Quran and hadith of the Prophet, peace be upon him, to convince people about taking necessary measures in the pandemic. But other people also used ayat and hadith in the opposite way. Again, yesterday, Imam Zubair told us a similar discussion he had. I am sure every one of us are having similar issues in our local communities. So, sister, can you tell us what criteria should be observed in the interpretation process? Or you can share us with the criteria you are observing.
Thank you very much for this question. I think it's a very crucial question whenever we search a certain, whenever we do research when it comes to the Quran or the Sunnah. First of all, I want to stick to a classification made by Dr. Farid al-Ansari, rahimahullah. He already passed away, but he left a huge amount of knowledge behind him. And he used to make this distinction between extracting values and lessons from the Qur'an for the purpose of dhikr and individual benefit, and extracting lessons and laws and ahkam from the Qur'an for the purpose of jurisprudence, fiqh, and ahkam, and so on, to benefit the community. So when it comes to the first part, when so according to Dr. Farid Al-Ansari, when you do extract lessons for individual benefit, then you are in the process of tadabbur and reflecting and tafakkur, which can even be done by illiterate people, by analphabetics who don't know how to read, since it's a very individual process to ponder upon the verses and words of God, of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then when we come to the process of extracting lessons and values from the Quran in order to formulate ahkam or jurisprudence and to share it with communities, then you have some rules or, as you said, methodologies and regulations to take in consideration. So then you come through a whole process of the linguistics aspects of some words in the Quran. You come through a process of tafsir mawdu'i, which is to contextualize certain aspects from Quranic verses to different contexts and so on. And then it's really important to stick to the scholars. So to really build your argumentations according to what's exactly there in the books, and to have like a very strong theological and methodological reference for your argumentation. What we see in reality actually is that it's possible for people to come up with theological arguments for whatever kind of ideas you want to support. But the very important question here is how far is this argumentation really valid? And then you come to a very a very critical point actually, that it's from an Islamic perspective, you first have the concept of hidayah also, so divine guidance. And as I said, then you have the second part, which is really related to which kind of analysis and argumentations are we following in interpreting the text to reach certain arguments. I will explain some of what I mentioned today in depth in the paper, which will be published also after this conference. So there I will also explain my methodology, which I used in the presentation I gave today. But as you mentioned, it's a very difficult terrain, and it's also very sensitive in the sense that it's easy to go the wrong way if you don't stick to valid methodologies.
Yeah, thank you, sister. Your explanation was really helpful. Regarding this question, I would like to share my thought that can be considered an addition to what you said. I believe that we should try to understand the verses of the Quran or small parts of the Quran in the light of general principles of the Quran, or I can say in the light of fundamental teachings of the Quran. For example, one of the fundamental teachings of the Quran is the principle of non-harmfulness. As Dr. Besson mentioned yesterday and Dr. Isgandarova today, the Quran emphasizes this principle very strongly. This principle has been epitomized in the statement, La darar wa la dirar. There should be neither harming nor reciprocating with harm. So I say, nobody can extract from the Quran something that would go against this principle. Nobody can deduce from the Quran that would be harmful to society and the members of the society. For our case, which is the pandemic, I believe such interpretations that would put lives at risk should be considered false and should be rejected because they go against this Quranic principle and many Quranic principles. Thank you for your answers, sister. And I think we can ask one more question, Dr. Isgandarova. Let me check the time first. Okay, we have some time, inshallah. Dr. Isgandarova, in your paper, you very well explained how the principles of Islamic jurisprudence urge us to act responsibly with regard to COVID-19. In this sense, there is no contradiction, and there should be no contradiction between religion and science. My question, why do we need to look at what the fiqh says, what the Islamic jurisprudence says, when we try to understand how we should act during the pandemic? Because doctors and scientists already tell us what to do and what not to do. Isn't this enough? Can you tell us about the importance of reviewing our responsibilities in the pandemic from the fiqh perspective?
Thank you, Dr. Halim. This is a really very good question. Especially, it makes us to think about the importance of the Islamic jurisprudence and other sources of Islamic tradition. First of all, for all Muslims all around the world, fiqh, we understand that fiqh is just interpretation of many Muslim scholars of the Qur'an and other Islamic sources, including the Sunnah, the prophetic tradition. We always go to look for our resources in order to know that how they guide us. Even we have many Muslim doctors, for example, in the past and also in the present, they inform with the Quran, they look at the Quran as the main foundation to be guided and to be guided to make sure that they don't make a wrong decision as well. Yes, science doesn't contradict whatever the Quran doesn't contradict what the science says. There's always collaboration in the Islamic history, as we see. It's not like in the Western world we saw the stages of science, the relationship between the science and also religion. But in Islamic history, we have always seen collaboration and between the Muslim scholars, doctors, engineers, and also Muslim ulama as well. I would like to say that fiqh is an important source of our understanding of COVID-19, but fiqh is not the only source to understand our behavior and our response to COVID-19. And in my presentation, I also mentioned that there are other sources in the Islamic tradition, including Islamic spirituality, Ruhaniya, and also theodicy, for example, how we understand our responses and our attitudes in our response to COVID-19. We should not forget that fiqh is, again, human interpretation of our sacred texts, including the Quran and also the prophetic tradition. There might be errors, but we have not to forget that the five principles of the Sharia, which I highlighted in my presentation, emphasize on the sacredness of life, the sacredness of religions, the sacredness of our mental health, the sacredness of our emotional and also spiritual health. So in that regard, I think that using these maqasid al-Sharia, we have to use these maqasid al-Sharia in order to prepare ourselves how we respond to COVID-19. That is why I decided to use it as one of the resources in my presentation. But I would like to emphasize again that it's not the only resource. We have other resources as well, including, like, for example, I gave an example from Canadian Muslims, how we respond to COVID-19. The COVID-19 Muslim Task in Canada, for example, organized by many Muslim doctors, imams, chaplains, social workers, and lay people, for example. They come together. They not only use the Islamic tradition as a resource to understand and prepare our response to COVID-19, but also how we interpret our sacred texts and how we adjust them to our current context in the midst of COVID-19.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Isgandarova. Now, I would like to ask Imam Abdul-Malik, you focus in your presentation on the individual level of Islamic spirituality, but there is also another aspect, institutionalized Islamic spirituality. Did you have any chance to observe on this aspect of Islamic spirituality? Sufi orders, Sufi schools, what are they doing during the pandemic? Did you have any chance to observe on them?
I think briefly, before even getting into that, the purpose behind the Sufi turuq and the different spiritual sort of social aspects of these things created and theoretically still exist in order to help people find motivation and find connection and camaraderie on their spiritual journey together, with the head being a teacher trying to lead them on that path because of their spiritual level and or experience. Now, this practice is never something perfect, but through this social impact of these things, whether it's the camaraderie, whether it's the ability to have people that you're leaning on, ta'awanu ala al-birri wa taqwa, from a social perspective, that in and of itself is a means to strengthen one's ability to find solace religiously or emotionally and otherwise. I've seen different orders doing different groups doing different things, but not just Sufi orders, communities as well. I think it'd be remiss to not acknowledge the fact that different communities and leaders, whether it's in the traditional Sufi tariqa perspective or it's in organizing. So, for example, here in Boston, Sheikh Yasser Fahmy started Prophetic Living, and that is a local grassroots-based organization of people trying to come together to serve the local community here in Boston. And there's programming and there's social distance outings and events and apple picking and hikes and walks, all to help people find spiritual and social and emotional upliftment in this challenging time. And so, yes, Turuq are doing things, social communities are doing things, whether it's virtually or in person, things are going on and they're happening. And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us success and allow us to find that social connectivity in this social distance time, because it's definitely challenging on us all.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you, Imam Abdul-Malik. Before closing the panel, I think our time is up, but before closing the panel, I thank all the panelists for their nice presentations and the fruitful conversation. I hope everybody has found the panel enlightening. There will be another panel after 30 minutes. Thank you, and salam alaikum.